My wife refused to let me visit my sick mother, but flew out to see her ex. I served her divorce papers on her return. I'm 34, male, and for most of my life, I believed in loyalty above all else. It's something my parents instilled in me growing up. A belief that when you commit to someone, you stick it out through thick and thin. But sometimes you learn the hard way that loyalty is a two-way street, and when it's one-sided, it's nothing short of a trap. My wife, who I'll call W, and I had been married for 6 years. On the surface, we looked like the perfect couple, steady jobs, a nice home, and plans for the future. But looking back, I can see the cracks were there long before things truly fell apart. W had always been controlling, I guess you could say. She liked things her way, and I usually went along with it to keep the peace. I thought compromise was part of marriage. Turns out, compromise doesn't work when one person takes and takes without ever giving back. The tipping point came when my mother fell seriously ill. My mom and I have always been close. She's the kind of woman who would give you the shirt off her back and never expect anything in return. So, when I got the call that she'd been admitted to the hospital with heart issues, I didn't think twice about wanting to go see her. She lived out of state, a few hours away by plane, but that wasn't going to stop me. When I brought it up to W, her reaction caught me off guard. "You can't just drop everything and leave," she said, frowning at me over her laptop. "We've got responsibilities here." "Responsibilities?" I asked, genuinely confused. "This is my mom we're talking about. She's in the hospital. I need to be there." She sighed like I was a child throwing a tantrum. "And what about work? What about the bills? You think you can just put everything on hold for this?" That word, this, made my blood boil. "It's not like I'm going on vacation, W. My mom's sick. She needs me." She rolled her eyes. "Fine, but don't expect me to rearrange my schedule to cover for you. And don't come crying to me if your boss gets pissed." I should have known then that her priorities were skewed, but I brushed it off as her being stressed. People say dumb things when they're under pressure, right? I told myself it didn't mean anything. What really floored me was what happened next. A few days later, I found out W had taken time off work. At first, I thought she'd come around to the idea of supporting me and decided to come with me to visit my mom. But no, she had other plans. "I'm flying to California," she announced casually over breakfast, like it was the most normal thing in the world. "California? For what?" I asked, setting down my coffee. She hesitated, then said, "An old friend of mine is going through a rough patch. I figured I'd go out and visit." "An old friend?" I repeated, narrowing my eyes. "Who?" That's when she got defensive. "Why does it matter? I haven't seen him in years, and he could use some support." "Him?" My stomach turned. I knew exactly who she was talking about, her ex-boyfriend. They'd dated before we met, and while she swore they were just friends now, I'd always gotten a weird vibe about it. Still, I never pushed too hard because I didn't want to come across as insecure. But this was crossing a line. "So let me get this straight," I said, my voice carefully controlled. "You wouldn't let me fly out to see my sick mother, but you're flying across the country to see your ex?" "It's not the same," she snapped. "This isn't just about him. It's about being there for a friend. You wouldn't understand." "Oh, I understand perfectly," I shot back. "You expect me to put my family on the back burner while you drop everything for your friend?" "Yeah, that makes total sense." She rolled her eyes again, like I was being unreasonable. "You're making this a bigger deal than it needs to be." But I wasn't. Not even close. W left for California a few days later. I didn't bother trying to argue with her again. It was clear she'd already made up her mind. But as I watched her pack her suitcase and chat on the phone, likely with him, my anger simmered just beneath the surface. It wasn't just her decision to go that got to me. It was the blatant disregard for how it made me feel. She didn't care. That was the worst part. The night before she left, I tried one last time to reason with her. "Do you even realize what this looks like?" I asked. "You're flying across the country to see a guy you used to date, leaving your husband behind while his mother's in the hospital." She sighed heavily, as if I was exhausting her. "I told you this isn't about him. It's about being there for a friend. Why can't you just trust me?" "Because trust goes both ways," I shot back. "You wouldn't trust me if the roles were reversed." That shut her up, but only for a moment. Then she said something that completely floored me. Well, maybe if you weren't so attached to your mother, you'd see things differently. I stared at her, speechless. Attached? Like caring about the woman who raised me was some kind of character flaw? There was no reasoning with someone who thought that way. While W was away, I made the trip to see my mom. I used some vacation time at work, something W had told me was impossible, and spent a week by her side. She was in rough shape but stable, and being there for her was exactly where I needed to be. My mom, of course, asked about W, wondering why she hadn't come along. I couldn't bring myself to tell her the truth, so I mumbled something about work commitments. She didn't press further, but I could see the disappointment in her eyes. While I was with my mom, W's behavior became even more bizarre. She barely called or texted, and when she did, her messages were short and vague. I tried to call her one evening to check in, but she didn't answer. Hours later, she sent a text, busy catching up with friends. Talk later. Friends. Plural now? The knots in my stomach tightened. I decided to dig a little deeper. I wasn't proud of it, but I logged into our shared phone plan account and checked her call logs. Sure enough, nearly every call she'd made since arriving in California had been to one number. His. I didn't recognize the area code, but a quick Google search confirmed it belonged to his city. My suspicion turned into cold, hard certainty. When W finally returned, she walked into the house as if nothing had happened. She even had the audacity to ask how my mom was doing, like she cared. She's doing better, I said curtly. Thanks for asking. She noticed the edge in my tone, but didn't comment on it. Instead, she started unpacking her suitcase, casually mentioning how great it was to catch up with her old friends. I let her talk, biting my tongue the entire time. I wasn't ready to confront her, not yet. That night, after she fell asleep, I went through her suitcase. Again, I'm not proud of it, but I needed confirmation of what I already knew. And sure enough, I found it, a small stack of photos tucked into one of her bags. They weren't scandalous, but they didn't need to be. In every single one, she and her ex were standing way too close, smiling like they didn't have a care in the world. The worst part, one of the photos was taken at a beach, a location she hadn't mentioned once in her catching up with friends' stories. It was clear this trip had nothing to do with helping anyone through a rough patch. It was a reunion, plain and simple. And I was done. The next morning, I confronted her. I didn't care about the fallout anymore. I was done tiptoeing around her excuses. We need to talk, I said as she sipped her coffee, scrolling through her phone like nothing was wrong. About what? She asked, not even looking up. Your trip. About what you were really doing in California. Her fingers froze mid-scroll, but she recovered quickly, setting her phone down with a sigh. I already told you. I was catching up with friends and helping an old friend through a rough time. I tossed the photos onto the table between us. These don't look like rough times to me. Her eyes widened, and for a moment, she looked genuinely panicked. But she quickly masked it with anger. You went through my stuff? Seriously? That's such an invasion of privacy. And flying across the country to meet your ex while lying to your husband isn't an invasion of trust? I shot back. Spare me the victim act, W. I'm done with it. She crossed her arms defensively. You're blowing this way out of proportion. Nothing happened between us. We're just friends. Friends. I said, my voice rising. Friends don't lie about beach trips. Friends don't monopolize your call logs for a week. And friends don't come before your spouse when his mother's in the hospital. So stop insulting my intelligence. She opened her mouth to argue, but couldn't find the words. Instead, she resorted to deflection. Maybe if you weren't so obsessed with your family, you'd have more room in your life for me. That was it. That was the moment I realized there was nothing left to save. Not only was she unapologetic, but she was actively trying to shift the blame onto me. It wasn't just selfish, it was cruel. You're right, I said coldly. I don't have room for you anymore. Her expression shifted, the anger replaced with shock. What's that supposed to mean? It means we're done, I said, standing up. I'm filing for divorce. She laughed bitterly, clearly not taking me seriously. You're not going to throw away 6 years of marriage over this. Watch me. True to my word, I reached out to a divorce attorney that same day. I explained the situation and asked about my options. Thankfully, Since we didn't have kids and our finances were relatively straightforward, the process wouldn't be too complicated. The lawyer advised me to document everything, especially her trip and her behavior, as it would strengthen my case. Over the next week, I kept my distance from W while gathering the necessary paperwork. She alternated between anger and desperation, trying everything from guilt trips to outright manipulation to change my mind. "You're overreacting," she said one night, her tone softer than usual. "We can work through this. Don't throw everything away over a misunderstanding." "It's not a misunderstanding," I replied, keeping my voice steady. "It's a pattern. You don't respect me, my family, or this marriage. I deserve better." She didn't like that answer. The next day, she tried a different tactic, turning my family against me. She called my sister, spinning a sob story about how I was abandoning her for no reason. Thankfully, my sister saw through the lies and shut her down. The final straw came when she tried to empty our joint account. Luckily, I'd already moved most of the funds to a separate account on my lawyer's advice. When she realized what I'd done, she flew into a rage, accusing me of being vindictive. "This is what you wanted, isn't it?" she yelled. "You're just looking for an excuse to get rid of me." "No," I said calmly. "You gave me the excuse. I'm just taking it." The day W returned from her trip, I had already begun the divorce process, but I didn't tell her immediately. I wanted her to experience the weight of her actions before delivering the final blow. It was cold, perhaps, but after everything she'd put me through, I felt no obligation to soften the reality for her. When I finally handed her the divorce papers, the look on her face was a mix of disbelief and fury. "You're really going through with this?" she asked, her voice shaking. "Absolutely," I said without hesitation. "This marriage stopped being a partnership the moment you decided your ex was more important than my family." She tried every tactic she could think of to change my mind. First, it was guilt. "You're giving up on us so easily," she cried. "What happened to for better or worse?" "I didn't sign up for betrayal and lies," I replied. Next, she turned to manipulation. "If you divorce me, I'll be left with nothing. Is that what you want? To ruin my life?" "Your life isn't my responsibility anymore," I said simply. When neither guilt nor manipulation worked, she escalated to threats. "I'll fight you for every penny," she snarled. "You'll regret this." I didn't rise to the bait. Instead, I calmly reminded her that I'd already consulted a lawyer and that her actions, including her attempted withdrawal from our joint account, were well documented. She had no real leverage, and we both knew it. When the day of the court hearing arrived, I wasn't sure what to expect. I had spent weeks preparing with my lawyer, gathering evidence and documenting everything: texts, her attempts to drain our joint account, her trip to see her ex, and the photos I'd found. My lawyer assured me we had a strong case, but walking into that courtroom, I couldn't shake the nerves. W was already there, sitting with her own attorney, her arms crossed and her face set in a defiant scowl. She barely looked at me when I entered, but when she did, her expression was pure venom. It was clear she wasn't planning to go down quietly. The judge began the session, reviewing the documents both sides had submitted. W's lawyer tried to argue that her actions during our marriage didn't warrant such a drastic outcome. He framed her trip to California as a misunderstanding, claiming there was no proof of infidelity and that her financial actions were taken out of desperation. She was under emotional distress at the time, her lawyer argued. This trip was meant to reconnect with old friends, not to betray her husband. I nearly scoffed out loud, but held my tongue. My lawyer, thankfully, wasn't having it. "With all due respect," my lawyer said, standing confidently, "the issue isn't whether there was physical infidelity. Pattern of deceit, entitlement, and financial irresponsibility. My client repeatedly tried to support his wife, both emotionally and financially, but was met with manipulation and betrayal." He then presented the evidence. Copies of her call logs showing near-daily communication with her ex, screenshots of her texts to mutual friends bragging about the trip, and the photos I'd found in her suitcase. When the judge saw the photos, his expression hardened. "Mrs. W's last name," the judge said, turning to her, "these photos suggest you were not forthcoming about the purpose of your trip. Can you explain why you omitted this information from your husband?" W stammered, her confidence visibly crumbling. I didn't think it was relevant." We were just catching up. It wasn't a big deal. The judge didn't look convinced. You're under oath, Mrs. W's last name. Was this trip truly about supporting a friend, or were there other motives? Her lawyer quickly interjected, trying to steer the conversation back to financial matters, but the damage was done. The judge clearly saw through her deflections. Next, we moved on to her attempt to empty our joint account. My lawyer presented bank statements and records of her failed withdrawal attempt. W shifted uncomfortably in her seat as the judge reviewed the documents. Mrs. W's last name. The judge said sternly, "It appears you tried to withdraw nearly all the funds from your joint account shortly after being informed of the impending divorce. Can you explain why?" Her voice was barely audible as she muttered, "I thought it was fair. I needed the money." The judge's expression grew even sterner. Fair? Draining a joint account without the consent of your spouse is not only unethical, it's potentially illegal. You're fortunate that the funds were moved before you could access them. W's face turned bright red. She tried to argue that she deserved a significant share of the money since she'd supported me during the marriage, but my lawyer quickly dismantled that claim by pointing out that I had been the primary earner while she frequently spent beyond her means. The judge deliberated for a few moments before delivering his decision. He ruled in my favor, citing W's behavior as evidence of bad faith. Not only was she denied any additional financial claims, but the judge also reprimanded her for her conduct during the marriage. "Mr., my last name," the judge said, turning to me, "you've shown remarkable restraint and diligence in how you've handled this situation. This court sees no reason to penalize you for taking steps to protect yourself." When the session ended, W stormed out of the courtroom without a word. Her attorney gave me a curt nod before following her out. I stayed behind with my lawyer, letting the relief sink in. It was over. The marriage, the lies, the manipulation, it was all behind me now. Looking back, that day in court felt like the final chapter in a story that had dragged on far too long. Walking out of the courthouse, I felt lighter, freer, like I was finally reclaiming my life. Sure, the process had been draining, but it was worth every ounce of effort to stand up for myself and put an end to her entitled behavior. So, if you've ever been through the ringer with someone who didn't value your worth, know this. You're stronger than you think. And if you enjoyed this story, hit that subscribe button. There's more where this came from. Sometimes life's biggest lessons come from the messiest chapters.